Good morning, everyone. Always a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Amitabh and the IFF team, for inviting us every year. And happy to start with just sharing some insights on what's happening in the fashion business, as well as what we think are some of the trends. Just a caveat that, of course, they don't change year on year. So, there would be a lot of that we might have spoken earlier as well. Can I have the presentation, please? And where can I see my slides? I can't see them here. I'm sorry about this, but great. So I'll very quickly cover because I'm sure we're running behind time, and so I have 15 minutes. And so very quickly we'll cover through the topics that are here. Economy and GDP, fashion industry, and some trends that we would like to talk about. So when we close this year, in March, the financial year, our estimated GDP is about 3.85 trillion. We'll close FY24 with that. And even if we take about a 6.5 or 7% growth every year, and we take an inflation of about 4 to 5%, we think we would reach nearly 10 trillion by 2035. So in the next 10 years, we are looking at adding a large quantum to our GDP, which of course has a impact on all aspects of our business. Private consumption at about 2.27, about 60%, is similar to a lot of other developed world, and would grow strong in the next few years. What is very interesting is that we would be crossing 1 trillion of merchandise retail, which is in this financial year. But we would be doubling it in the next 10 years. So whatever we have now, we would be adding a similar quantum in the next 10 years. And that is what makes it very exciting for anyone who is in business of merchandise in India. And services has a larger share, will continue to grow in the next few years. Like I mentioned, that at 60%, India is pretty much similar to a lot of developed world from a consumption perspective, and we will come back to it. There is a reason for showing this slide, but we will come back to it in the next few slides. There are a lot of categories in merchandise. Fashion is at about 70 billion in 2023. I mean, apparel is about 70 billion. There are a lot of other categories which count in fashion, and we'll talk about that. There is a rejig happening. There are naturally priorities, where other segments are growing and apparel would become slower, and larger competition would come in from services, which is largely healthcare and education, where we will see the maximum growth across the years. And that's why one really needs to be cognizant of, what the share of wallet is, what is it the consumer that they're spending on, and, how is it getting divided across categories over the next few years. In terms of some business macro shifts that are happening in our country, which we might not, while we are all aware of them, we might not be tracking them on a daily basis. But what's interesting to see is that about 14 trillion investment has been done in developing infrastructure since independence in India. But 50% of it, which is about 7 trillion, has been done only in the last 9 years. And we have started seeing, and the maximum impact of it has been seen post-COVID. So we have seen, development happening, new infrastructure coming up, and that's when we also see a lot of change happening in our economy. Another 7 trillion is expected to be invested in the next 6 years in the economy. So just the cascading impact of that on our economy is going to be, very big, and is a very positive shift from a consumption perspective. That's one of the primary reasons the whole world is looking at India at this moment, because this is the only country which offers this kind of a growth opportunity. Plus the fact that it's sort of coupled with very, very rapid digitization. So, if a population of 1.44, of which about 950 million people are enrolled as voters, you see the wide spectrum of digital inroads, starting from 1.36 billion of Aadhaar cards to about 92 million of e-Sanjeevani, or about 100 million people learning online, plus of course Facebook, Google, where we are the world leaders. So apart from Twitter, where we are number 3 in the world with about 30 million subscribers, we are the leaders in almost all other social media. Of course, we would be talking about it in the next 2 master classes, but the fact is, the kind of inroads this gives you, the kind of connect it gives from a digitization perspective, this is, sort of, no other country can offer this. And that's the reason why a digital online to offline or offline to online growth, this is what will really increase the momentum in the next few years. So while brick and mortar retail, modern retail is expected to grow, though there is a valid question as to where is the real estate for that in India, but digital, because of the fact that digital has so much inroad into the country, that is what will really propel the growth of modern retail in the country. So yes, naturally, online would be faster than offline, but the fact that it's now digitally enabled or offline to online is, it's an omni-channel presence that one is really looking at. We've talked about this earlier as well. Consumption is in a few pockets in the country. So 20% of entire consumption accounted by Bombay and Delhi and the NCR region. Another next 6 metros account for 20, the next 65 cities account for 20, and rest of the consumption comes from rest of India. But this is changing, and of course it's a much slower change than what we had expected. But there are new pockets that are coming up, and one really needs to track that. One parameter is the GST, which is at a state level. The GST that is generated at a state level, and so one can see that there is much more economic activity happening in these states. So Maharashtra and Haryana really lead that. The national average of GST per capita is about $115. There are many states which are doing much more than that. There are so these are the states which are above the national average and are growing at a faster rate. But what's more interesting is if you track the DDP, which is the domestic product at a district level, there are many, many surprises that would come in, that while they might not be active consumption centers just now, but the way they will grow in the next few years are the new hotspots that are coming up. So Rangareddy district, where the high-tech city Hyderabad has the largest per capita GDP as far as a district goes, which comes as a big surprise. Naturally Gurgaon, everyone intuitively understands would be the next, but the fact is Solon, of course that's industry-led. Solon has such a high, economy, which one doesn't track normally. But the fact is that once industry comes in, there will be consumption centers that would come around that. So one really needs to start focusing on micro markets rather than going all over or looking at just the larger cities. Big surprise comes, Indore is supposedly a very good consumption center, so is Lucknow. But there, but at the district level, their economy is similar to the national average of about 1.6 lakhs. There's so many centers which are way beyond that, and that's why looking at a micro market by micro market is where one can really look at from a retail perspective. So those were some key insights from a macro indicator. Quickly on the fashion industry, about 70, so fashion is no longer just limited to apparel, as we've been saying for many years. So roughly about 113 billion is the total size of the market. Beauty still remains the fastest growing category, and we would see apparel coming down as a share, but yes, there are many other categories, and almost all brands are making sure that they're addressing all categories when they're speaking to their consumer. Very quickly, this hasn't changed dramatically, and so basically menswear is the largest share at about 40%, women's wear is the next, the smaller one, and which we will see a much faster growth rate in. Balance is accounted for by kids. A 50-50 share between branded and unbranded, naturally branded expected to increase over the next few years. About a 70-30 split between Western and Indian clothing. Menswear is largely Western at about 9-10% of Indian, and the reverse for women, where about it's again 70% Indian and 30% Western. Western we'll see growing, fusion we'll see growing. Kids is largely Western. Between traditional and modern, about a 70-30 split, with 70% still traditional, but apparel is one of the largest categories in as a share of modern retail, and we'll see that growing in the next few years. Quickly talking about a few trends, and this is something that just wanted to mention, that intuitively all of us understand as consumers, as business people, that the consumer basket is growing very rapidly. There are many, many categories that are vying for the same wallet share. And, in terms of time and in terms of wallet share, there are many categories which are growing. We ourselves spend on many categories. But when you look at it being absolutely measured and over the last few years, so US has released its 100-year study of consumer expenditure. And they have tracked categories across food, clothes, food plus clothing, and then looking at housing and everything else. Everything else is all the other spends that we have on discretionary products, which are, and healthcare and education, beyond these three categories. What is the basic, food, or what we say, roti, kapra, or makan. So if you look at 1901, it had a very, very large share, and only, it was 80% of your total basket, and 20% were other categories. And another 100 years down the line, it's about 50% is everything else. Apparel has come down from 14% to 2.6% of the wallet share. And if we look at 1984, which was 6%, we are very much there at about 6% in India. And while we've only tracked 2014 and 2023, the numbers are, you can see that the skew towards beyond apparel, beyond food, and beyond clothing is very clear in terms of its measurability. Just looking at how the number of categories has grown from 1991 till 2023, which is for each of us and as business people, we know that we are spending from the same wallet across these categories. One more, aspect of this study, in terms of looking at the spend across years, the number of garments that were bought by US consumers, and the number of pairs of shoes that were bought by the consumers. Very interesting, if you see 1972, a spend of about $565, average spend of $18, 28 garments, 3-4 pairs of shoes. And when we come to 1991, the spend is $1,735, which is pretty much similar to what they're spending in 2021 as well. So the fact is that the actual spend hasn't increased, but the number of clothes has gone up from 40 to 70, nearly 70, and the pairs of shoes have gone up, a number of pairs of shoes have gone up. So, that is what we really need to understand, that there is clothing, people are buying for a short time, they're buying many more options, and that's where one needs to see that we're giving that value to consumers. There no longer spends are being planned for a very long time when we're looking at clothes. You're looking at quick fashion, you're looking at something that's interesting at that time, and moving on to the next one very quickly. So one is really not looking at investing a lot of money into apparel. And that's where just wanted to mention that this year has been sort of challenging for many, many businesses. There has been many question marks as to why there is a slowdown happening in the last year. And while there is a lot of talk about a K-shaped growth happening in the country, it's very clear that there will be premiumization, which will be smaller categories, smaller quantums, but there would be a much larger value market that would be available to us for many years to come. But the fact is that when you're looking at the value business, the Indian ecosystem doesn't really work towards that. We have a very high cost of supply chain, we have a very high cost of real estate, we have a very average or a very low purchasing power ability, which is very different from what you see in other expensive countries. So be it Europe, be it GCC, the expense in the supply chain or in the real estate is much lesser. So with such lower purchasing power, but very high aspirations, because the fact is that we are all digitally connected. The average consumer is very, very aspirational. So how does one work out a value offer which, or a value play which makes sense? And that's where we feel that the business completely needs to be re-engineered. One needs to look at it from scratch, simply because the current fashion traditional ecosystem doesn't help in creating a quality, in a value purchase. And that's the reason why we say that all facets of the business, the entire value chain, be it design, be it merchandising, the number of SKUs one is offering, the number of options one is offering, looking at the shopping experience, the entire value chain needs to be really looked at from a value perspective. And that's an opportunity. There is, of course, going to be a lot of competition in that space as well, because almost every company is looking at it. But the fact is that it cannot work in the current ecosystem. One would need to look at it afresh, with a fresh mind. Of course, technology would be a great enabler and a value creator for any business just now. All of us are aware of the fact that technology at every facet of the business, every aspect, starting from design till the final delivery, is very, very important. And, but the biggest part is that it needs to be a mindset within the organization and not really, just a way of working. It needs to be incorporated in the whole company at all levels. AI as an enabler and a disruptor. So, there's a lot of conversation about that nothing changes for decades, and then, within a year, decades happen. And actually, the last year was exactly like that. With, while we've been working with AI and with, deep learning and machine learning for many years, but since generative AI has come in, it has made a lot more impact. The fact that ChatGPT was launched only in November 2022, it's only been 13, 14 months since ChatGPT was launched. And it's become an integral part of all of our lives, and it's become an integral part of business. So one really needs to incorporate it in the business and see from a creativity perspective, differentiation perspective, and in what aspects can AI help the business. But from a generative AI perspective, while I'm sure there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of work happening around it, the only hurdle that we can see is the fact that there isn't enough talent, which can sort of implement the generative AI that's required, simply because finally it's the human being and the AI working together to make sure that you create something distinct. So yes, we will have to wait, till prompt engineers become a little less expensive, but talent is something that one would really need here. Just very quickly talking about the fact that over years, a lot of things have changed, but the speed of change is really, really accelerated in the last few years. So yes, with technology, with digital, and now with AI coming in, the speed is going to be much faster. And what do companies do to make sure that they are running with the same speed or maybe even faster at times? The fact that one needs to focus on a lot of agility here and try and build in agility and become an agile company as much as possible. It's a big mind shift that needs to be done within the Indian companies. It will take time, but the fact is that we need to build much more agile organizations to be enabled to move with the speed of change that, so if you see the last 10 years, fashion industry have been transformational. But are we moving with the same agility or that is required? So maybe partnering, acquiring, or co-incubating is a way that we can work with a lot of new companies that are coming up, new ideas that are coming up, which might not work in the traditional companies. We've already spoken a lot about sustainability. Green will remain the new black for many years. And, as Anish mentioned, it's very important, and we are all conscious about it. And the last point, the fact that we are growing so rapidly, it's very, very important that we invest in the right sourcing and the right capacities, because that will become a hurdle in a few years of time. Indian ecosystem is still not organized, but we do need to invest so that the fashion ecosystem continues to grow. Thank you.